Justin, what is slave morality?
Concept generally comes from Nietzsche. You could say it's the affirmation of weakness and the repudiation or the eschewment of strength. So here's what I mean by that. It's a stretch, but not an unfair stretch, to think of slave morality as being, in a sense, the beta mindset. You are never responsible for your problems. You are always a victim. Someone else is always to blame. There's no responsibility, and if the buck does stop, most certainly the buck does not stop with you. Okay, so the other one is more like the alpha mindset, where you kind of affirm yourself, you take responsibility for yourself, and Nietzsche would argue, like, create for yourself. And so this is the one where, like, you chart your own destiny, you try to become better, and you basically self-affirm is what's going on. I think the relevant point that you have right now, and one of the things and this is where it all ties back into where we are right now in the West, is there's a colleague I work with who mentions that we are plagued with the victimhood Olympics. It's to see who can be the most oppressed. It's almost like being oppressed is a virtue. And don't get me wrong, people start from different spots in life. We are all dealt a different deck of cards. Some cards are better, some cards are worse. Whatever, this is life. But if you constantly blame, or if you constantly say that it's never your fault, and this is where you get back into the slave morality, if it's constantly someone else's problem, you want the government to fix it, or you want, in economic terms, central banks to fix it, or whatever, right? Or better yet, let's say you're a guy, you're trying to, find, like a girlfriend, trying to find a wife or whatever, right? It's going out there and expecting that, a guy will find a woman that will love the guy just for being a guy. And the answer to that question is there's only really one kind of relationship that exists, and that's like a maternal relationship, or maybe you have like, if you, of course you have a mom, or hopefully you have a mom, or like maybe you have like a grandmother or whatever, right? That, where you have this maternal relationship. But beyond that, like for a guy, and this is kind of where you get back into the alpha and the beta concept here. And again, this is a stretch, but hopefully not too unfair a stretch, is like, if you want to, from the male perspective, if you want to attract a mate, like you have to go out there. So here's the bad news. Like no one's going to come to you just for you being you. Okay. That kind of sucks, whatever, right? Besides your mom, whatever, right? Like the door's closed. But here's the good news. The good news is that what nature does give you, and this is where it kind of gets back into, the alpha or the overman, concept, is that if you assert yourself, it's okay, well, listen, what I have right now, I'm not very happy with, but it's in my power to change myself. It's in my power to better myself. It's in my power to take risk. And yes, it might be scary. Yes, it might be a process or whatever, right? But I'm going to take responsibility of it. I'm going to affirm it. And I am going to create my own destiny. And hopefully in the process of doing this, I'll make myself better. In the process of making myself better, I'll make my community better. I'll get my goals, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. But the key thing is that or the individual. The individual is taking responsibility. It's not, oh, I would only do this if it weren't for that, or I would only do this if I wasn't dealt the shitty cards over here or whatever. Right. The key thing is the individual takes responsibility, or that's how one of the key things I
the
think about
slave
it.
morality is it's virtue signaling at its finest. We see today, Justin was just saying that it is basically just a who is the most oppressed Olympics. But I guarantee you, if you put all your shit in a pile and 100 other people did that, you would take your shit and run. Because at the end of the day, you would much rather have your problems than someone else's, no matter what background you come from, whatever oppression you've ever felt. It is just one of the most bogus things ever, especially if you're living in America, where, I mean, we've literally had every single race or ethnicity do pretty much anything, but they are competing to see who is the most oppressed. And then they are trying to call that virtuous. They are trying to flex how oppressed you have been. It is the weak trying to corrupt the strong and bring them down to them. It's like the fat person at McDonald's saying it is okay as long as everyone else is fat and at McDonald's with me. But even though that is not okay, it is not good to be fat objectively. It is unhealthy for your body. You will most likely die sooner than someone that is healthy. But if it is this mindset that I don't care as long as everyone else is fat with me, I would much rather die soon as long as the person next to me dies before me. It is just a very horrible mind just grudging system that we have, and it is on such a mass scale today. Justin, what was the quote from Bloom that society is like Nietzsche was predicting?
Yeah, so Bloom makes the comment that Nietzsche was profound in the sense that Nietzsche had a perspective where he could reflect back and look at it's like the piece that could survey the whole. Bloom also makes the comment that we in the West still revolve around Nietzsche. And what's particularly interesting about Nietzsche, especially where we are right now with the current political situation, is that Nietzsche's very much been adopted by the left, which is very unusual because that's actually not, or at least traditionally, that's not been the case for Nietzsche. But in any event, it is what it is. Nietzsche was also arguably he lived and then died in the late 1800s. Arguably very misunderstood. A lot of his work was selectively edited by his sisters or by his sister, and then it was issues I'll just draw a veil, but issues happen because of that. This is the key thing, Josh. Let's go back to your fat person at McDonald's example, because I think this does a really good job. Virtue always shames the wicked just by virtue, just by it being there. And if you go back to our fat person at McDonald's or whatever, right? This is an example of, slave morality. Oh, the reason I'm fat is because I have a thyroid problem. Oh, the reason I'm fat is because, I have my disabilities or my beat it or whatever, right? Insert excuse, anything under the sun to avoid blaming, the individual. And yes, let me just pause to say, if you do have a legitimate medical issue, I see where you're coming from. But I mean, like a legitimate medical issue, that's like maybe like a 1 in a million type thing, because beyond that, guess what? It's on you. It's on you, and that virtuous person in line reminds you of it. So the mind game or the mind screw here is that if you can convince the people who are being virtuous that their virtue is actually vice, you invert the system, you invert morality, you turn it on its head. And this is what Nietzsche argued that was done to the teachings of Christ through Paul. But whatever, don't hold me to that. But my point is that Nietzsche had a great appreciation, I would argue, for Christ, but he absolutely loathed what Christianity had become from that. There's another author I really like to read, a guy named George Friedman, Next 100 Years, Flashpoints, whatever, right? And Flashpoints, Friedman does this whirlwind tour of kind of going from the Reformation all the way to the European Civil War, World War I and World War II. And it was very interesting because Nietzsche played a huge role in this. And Nietzsche, I think, correctly identified a lot of call it the mental philosophical fault lines that laid the ground for World War II, that laid the ground for Hitler, and that laid the ground for World War III. Like Nietzsche, with astonishing clarity, I would argue, even though he couldn't necessarily say on this date, this person or whatever will do that, but Nietzsche, I believe there's an argument to make that Nietzsche correctly identified the root causes 50 to 70 years before, the storm actually hit. So, I mean, the guy was...
The vast majority of people are trapped in this slave morality. But if you are someone that is like this, how could you actually kind of get out of this mindset where trying to bring people down to make yourself feel good and trying to put all of these vicious things as virtues? What would be like a solution to that? Because I just see us going further and further down this road of people just trying to
absolutely. No, I think I've got some advice from this. The first step probably that anyone takes is always the hardest. Okay, and so that's the first thing I would make. And the second thing I would say is, how do you eat a whale, Josh? One bite at a time. And so if you've got something that you're trying to prove, or back up, if you want to take control of your own destiny and take responsibility for yourself, the first thing is to say, okay, well, listen, I understand there's a bunch of things I can't control, and I understand all this other nonsense, but here's what's going to happen. I am going to be responsible, like for myself, whatever, right? I'm not going to ask the government, I'm not going to ask whatever, to be responsible. I am going to be responsible for myself, and in doing so, I will take pride in my actions, when I'm able to have success. I will admit fault and not necessarily take shame, but like if I make a mistake, I'll be quick to admit it and say, hey, listen, I goofed on this one. I need to do better or whatever, right?
Justin,
and more.
What about from a societal standpoint, though? Because I agree, it all starts with the individual, but it seems like as a society, we're going further and further down. And most people, not only do they not want to change, but they think everyone else should be like them. And they continuously, as a society, we're trying to bring people down. I just see the trends continuously going in that motion. But what would kind of reverse course? Is it the end of the fourth turning where we experience vast amount of pain and people realize that no one's going to come and fix their problems and everyone's in deep shit? Is it like that's really the only thing that I can think of?
So here's how I'd frame it. We are steeped right now in the Western slave morality. Like that's just the way it is. And in fact, if anyone has a different view, they're oftentimes labeled, and name called or whatever, right? But so be it. That is the weak's only way to attack the strong, is to do that. I think that pain and suffering will compel people to change. But going back to our fat person at McDonald's, you hope that fat person can have their come to Jesus moment and, reform their ways, start eating well, go on a diet, whatever, before they're being wheeled into the operating room for the quadruple bypass surgery. Because at that point, they might have found the will to change, but the owl of Minerva has flown. It's a little late. For society, my hope would be that, well, there's a cheesy phrase, I do believe it's an accurate phrase, is that I hope society can wake up. But who is it that said, only at the edge or only at the precipice will people find the will to change? And I think we're getting closer to the precipice in America, but I do not think we are yet at the precipice. And so the bad news is I think things are going to get worse before they get better. And my hope is that we get worse just enough to wake people up, but not enough where you have a tremendous amount of permanent damage that cannot be undone or ameliorated.
Well,
So,
Justin, we are both white males, at least the last time I checked, but that means that we have been privileged our entire lives, and
oh
we
yeah, everything,
we have
everything, everything is our fault, Josh. And
we
even things you
well,
don't know, just completely your
we have
fault.
no say in this conversation because we have never felt real oppression. So I'm sure most of you guys are thinking that right now, just like us. So take no word for anything that we say.
Josh,
Oh,
one other thing too. One other thing too. Solzhenitsyn argued that once you rob a man of everything, you freed him. He no longer has anything to lose. And this is why I think it's really important. If you can stand up for yourself, like my attitude is I don't have to slobber the knob of any HR department. Whatever. Right? I can hold my own views, and quite frankly, I can do what I want within reason. When I want. And so I find that to be incredibly liberating. And if you basically come to the conclusion that, hey, listen, whatever you do, like you're persona non grata, who cares? You can do whatever you want. Like you just get over this, and it's like, wait a minute, like I didn't even care what these people think about me in the first place. Like I don't even care now. And then like you gain this massive amount of intellectual freedom because you can speak the truth, versus, or as I'm fond of saying, you can do what you're supposed to do as a guy, which is speak the truth, versus do the slave morality mindset, which is ask will other people be okay with me thinking this is okay. So you have to self-censor, and I'm not putting up with that nonsense.